This week, Doug Burks, CEO of the Security Onion Solutions, joins us to peel back the layers of your enterprise with Security Onion 2. Then I'm going to continue to guide you through scanning for default credentials with Python, lots and lots of updates to the open source code that I released a couple of weeks ago. So I'll walk you through that. Then in the security news, lol bins that make you lol. Overexposing your medical records. Shrootless gets past SIP. 73.6% of statistics are made up, and other such lies. We love Signal. If a 0-day drops on the internet, how many people have it? Fake Harvard students uses for Apple cleaning cloths. Biddy override characters. Who owns my house? Who owns your printer? And the return of Clippy. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly. For security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly.
Every 11 seconds, there's a new ransomware attack. Oil pipelines, universities, corporations, all paying millions of dollars. Barracuda says, don't pay the ransom. Before a ransomware attack occurs, train your teams to recognize an attack and use anti-phishing technology. Protect your applications, and they can't get onto your network. Simple backup and restore solutions quickly recover your data without paying the ransom. Build your ransomware protection plan now by visiting securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda.
And welcome to the show. But first, let me introduce you to a man who went to the Canary Islands and didn't find a single canary. He also went to the Virgin Islands and same thing. No canaries. Mr. Paul Asadorian.
Welcome, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. It is episode 717, recorded here on November 3rd, 2021, right here in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. To my left, Mr. Larry Pesce is here with us. Welcome, Larry.
How's it going?
It's going good.
Good.
Sometimes I read the episode number, and like very rarely, and I'm like, wow, we've done a lot of episodes. I don't often kind of like look back like that, as you well know, Larry, but yeah. I was like 717, all of a sudden, like this week just sounded like a lot.
Yeah. So on the way here, I put on my
wizard robe and hat.
Yeah. Totally. You again? I put on my zip-up sweatshirt, my Security Weekly zip-up sweatshirt from the 10-year anniversary show.
Right.
And I'm like, man, this is a 6-year-old sweatshirt. Jack Daniel has underwear older than me.
Oh, absolutely.
That's where my train of thought went.
Right.
Yeah.
Stop going through his underwear drawer.
I know. It's so tempting, though. Mr. Josh Marpet is here with us. Josh, welcome.
Why, thank you.
Mr. Lee Neely is here with us as well. Lee, welcome.
Good to be here, ready for another fun-filled day, and you totally got me off topic thinking about Clippy, but I really want to find out what we got with the Security Onion stuff.
If you use Teams, you're gonna thank me. Mr. Tyler Robinson is here with us, rocking the gunner. Those look like gunners.
Those are the OG gunners, first edition, very first ones.
Very nice. Welcome, Tyler, to the show this evening. Let's see. Quick announcement before we get started. Security Weekly Unlocked will be held in person this December through the 5th at the Hilton Lake Buena Vista. Keynotes from Alyssa Miller, John Strand, Leslie Carhart, and Dave Kennedy. Visit securityweekly.com/unlock to register for free. Register for free and check out our Rockstar lineup. Wow. Yeah, I didn't think it was actually, I guess, well, Burgundy reads what's on the teleprompter. Joining us for this segment, Doug Burks. Tonight, Doug joins us to talk about the Security Onion, of course, free open platform for threat hunting, enterprise security monitoring, and Windows and log management, not just Windows log management. Doug, welcome back to Security Weekly.
Thank you, Paul. It's great to be back.
It's nice to have you, my friend. You haven't been on in a while, so I want to kind of start off with a little bit about you, Doug, and kind of your background, how you got into this crazy industry.
Absolutely. So, like many of us, I got my first computer when I was really young. I was 6, and I started writing programs in BASIC, and I just fell in love with this world of computers. when I was in middle school, a family friend said, if you're into computers, you got to read this book. And it was The Cuckoo's Egg by Cliff Stoll. And again, that's something that resonates with a lot of people because that was their first introduction to the world of cybersecurity, which wasn't even a term back then. But, as a middle schooler who did not enjoy reading, I stayed up all night long reading this book about, one of the first real world documented cyber intrusions. And I was just fascinated by this world of good versus evil inside the world of the computer.
Doug,
and so
I just want to stop you there. We've got a lot in common because I started programming at around 7-ish. I also am not a great reader like that. And I stayed up all night reading the Cuckoo's Egg. Shit you not.
Well, there you go. There you go. It's amazing, when I tell that story, like how many folks like share such a common background. So whenever I get the opportunity to thank Cliff Stoll, he's launched so many careers just by working that incident and documenting it in such a way that it inspired an entire generation of folks to come after him and kind of carry the torch forward. So, well done, Mr. Stoll, for doing that for all of us.
Absolutely.
But kind of fast forward from there, after kind of thinking about, could I even do this for a living? So I went and got my computer science degree. I went and did SANS certifications, and I taught for SANS for a while. And I was privileged enough to be able to join Mandiant as their deputy chief security officer working for Richard Baitlick. So I did that for several years. And at the same time that all of these great things were happening, in 2008, I had started this project called Security Onion. And, basically out of necessity, right? They say that, every great open source project starts with a developer scratching his own itch. And, I felt the need for this kind of a tool set. And so I put it together for myself and I put it out there thinking that maybe a couple of other folks might be interested in it. And as it turns out, it was more than a couple of other folks, so over the years, we've really kind of snowballed and built this massive community of worldwide users using this free and open platform for real world threat hunting and incident response. And so, from starting that project in 2008, over the years in 2014, I finally said, okay, well, there's enough demand out there for folks asking for the kind of things that you need around a free and open project, things like training and professional services. Okay, in 2014, it was time to start a company to provide that kind of stuff. So that's where Security Onion Solutions came from in 2014. And so, even though I had a great job working at Mandiant, we got acquired by FireEye. I had a great boss, Richard Baitlick, who was my longtime hero and role model. It was an ideal situation, but, I couldn't ignore this worldwide community of folks that were really kind of asking me for help. And so it became time to really take that leap of faith and start a company. And I've been doing it ever since.
And Doug, having made similar leaps like that, I don't think people quite realize there's a conversation that happens that people don't often talk about. And that's the one typically with your wife or significant other. It's like, hey, I got this really great job and I'm going to leave it and go do this other thing, which has like a ton of risk associated with it. And like, that's cool, right, honey, sweetie? Yes. No. Did you have a similar conversation like that?
Absolutely. Again, you and I are on the same wavelength, right? Man. Because definitely this conversation with my wife started happening probably in 2012, if not earlier than that. It was really the fact that
you were priming the pump, right? You were getting ready.
That's right. You got to start the conversation early because they're just not going to agree the first time you bring it up, right? So you got to start the conversation early. You got to start working on that and thinking about it and asking those questions and figuring out, can we make this work as a family? Yeah, it took some thinking. It took some discussing, and a lot of that, honestly, was getting over my own fear and my own imposter syndrome. I've never been a CEO before. I don't know what a CEO does. I don't know how to start a company, but I was willing to figure it out. But I had to get over that fear, and I had to get over that imposter syndrome that we all kind of deal with from time to time. But having done that and having gotten through all that and having pushed through all of those dips, it's been one of the most gratifying things that I've ever done in my life.
How many people work for Security Onion Solutions today, Doug?
So we are at 16 currently, and we are currently in the midst of several interviews. So we are growing as quickly as we can.
Good for you. I think one of the questions, we often ask when you have an open source project and maybe some commercial stuff, like, is all the software that you create 100% open source? And, follow on to that, then what does Security Onion Solutions do exactly?
Yeah, so, I have been a big fan of open source software since I first discovered it in 1997, kind of having grown up with Microsoft software and commercial software. Reading about open source in 1997 just completely blew my mind. And, so I felt like I have been so blessed by being able to take advantage of all of these open source projects throughout the years that, it's now my privilege and opportunity to kind of give back to those open source communities. So all of our software is 100% free and open. And so, that's not to say that we won't have some kind of commercial software in the future, but today all of our software is free and open. What we do as a company is we kind of have a 3-phase business model. So phase 1, which I started with in 2014, as I mentioned before, having previously taught for SANS, I knew that, we could make a living doing training, and that was certainly something that we were seeing demand for. So I started by offering training classes on Security Onion. That worked quite well to kind of bootstrap the company and get it off the ground. And we've been very successful through our training classes in kind of helping folks get about 80% of the way to being self-sufficient with our software through those training classes. That last 20% is really kind of that gap that's going to be based on things that are unique to the organization or perhaps the adversaries that they face. And that's really where we kind of plug in phase 2 of the business model, which is professional services, so that we can get on WebEx or Zoom or whatever, and we can help that customer, whether it's from installation to configuration to troubleshooting to tuning, whatever the case may be, we'll help them get the most out of their Security Onion deployment.
Yeah, and that 20% I think is really, even folks with experience like myself are still struggling with that 20%, right? Because you got to put a lot of time in there. And then if you don't have the knowledge or skills, you have to develop those to be able to kind of complete that and operationalize it. So I think that's absolutely
true. And, I've felt that in my own experience of using open source projects throughout the years. I feel like I can jump into a project and get pretty good with it pretty quickly. But then there's those kind of unique corner cases or edge cases where, it might take somebody who's been there, done that, who's dealt with that particular issue and has the bruises to prove it. And that's really where we come in, because, we've literally seen all of the problems that folks can run into. And, it's a lot quicker and easier for us to diagnose that situation and come up with a solution very, very quickly to get things back on track.
And then, so in addition to professional services, did you mention the hardware appliances yet?
Yeah. So phase 3 of the business model is really something that folks had been asking for a long time. And that's that, we've made the software pretty easy to use in terms of downloading it, installing it on your own hardware. But the question really becomes like, how do I spec out the hardware? How do I know what kind of processor to get with how many cores? How much RAM do I really need? What kind of storage do I need? And so, really folks were asking for, can you just build a box for me, drop ship it to me, and take all of those variables out of the equation. And so that's absolutely what we did a few years ago. We announced our hardware appliances. So we've got standard 1U and 2U rack mount boxes and kind of different sizes and capacities. So we've got, the SOS 500 and the SOS 1000 and the SOS 10,000. So we're kind of geared toward different network speeds. And then we've got kind of the back end appliances where you're going to be storing all of your logs in Elasticsearch. And we've got different sizes and capacities for that as well. And that's really for kind of the traditional enterprise data center installations. One of the new things that we just announced at our annual Security Onion conference back in October is kind of the corollary to that, which is, we have a lot of users in the military that are doing emergency incident response, and they need a flyaway kit. They need something that is as powerful as those 1U and 2U rack mount boxes, but it's a little bit more portable, something they can fit in an overhead compartment. So we've got some really custom designed hardware solutions for that, extremely powerful, yet extremely portable. And so we just announced those back in October and already seeing a lot of interest from our men and women in uniform that are defending our country. So we're glad to help support those folks.
That's really awesome. Doug, I want to transition into some of the architecture and design decisions, because I remember back in the day when you're doing Security Onion, I downloaded your ISO and I put it in a VM, and I was pretty much up and running at that point. And then at some point you made a lot of changes, and when I went back to it, I'm like, wait a minute, I gotta read the documentation. What do I want? I want a forwarding node and then this other kind of node, and I had to actually think about my design and architecture. So maybe just at a high level, what are some of the options there?
Absolutely. So last year we announced Security Onion 2, which is a project we've been working on for about 3 years at that point. And it was the first kind of from the ground up rewrite of the platform to make it container based, to make it more scalable, more reliable, more enterprisey, and continuing to focus on network side, but also making sure that we're equally as strong on the host-based side as well. And we're really bringing both of those together into our own brand new web interface. So we built a new web interface for alerts. We built a new web interface for threat hunting. And really in terms of kind of architecture.
I want to stop you right there, Doug. You didn't talk about the packet. I mean, you're going to probably show it hopefully in your demo, but your packet analysis interface is really sexy hot.
Well, I appreciate that. That's one of the things that we spend so much time in. It's important to not only make it look good, but to make it feel good and to make it, really have the right workflow. I know from personal experience from years and years ago of working with commercial appliances and trying to get from, an IDS alert to something that even remotely resembles some packets took 20 clicks to get there and still didn't quite give me, the information that I was looking for. So this is, very much, us trying to design a platform by analysts for analysts. We've all been there, done that. We've all been in the trenches, and we want to make sure that we're eating our own dog food, we're drinking our own champagne, and we're building things that we want to use, but more importantly, that we actually do use. So we monitor our production networks for the company, we monitor our home networks, and we're eating our own dog food, and we're making sure that it tastes good enough and that we're enjoying it as we go.
No, it's awesome.
So to your question about architecture, I can kind of talk about some of the different node types and the way that works. So, you can, for folks that are kind of starting off with the platform, the easiest way to get started is we have what's called an import node. So you can install Security Onion 2 in a virtual machine and configure it for import. And that's really the quickest and easiest way to get started with Security Onion. It's got the least amount of hardware requirements. You can run a virtual machine with 4 gigabytes of RAM and only one network interface. And you can be up and running very quickly and easily. And you can use that to import PCAP files or import EVTX files. So if you've got Windows logs in EVTX format, you can import those. And that's actually what I'll show in my demo in a few minutes, is an import VM where I've imported a PCAP and some EVTX files. So that's the quickest and easiest way to get up and running very quickly with Security Onion. Moving on from there, you can kind of go from import mode to what we call evaluation, which is kind of like import mode, but instead of just importing existing PCAP files, you can actually sniff live traffic. Now, evaluation mode, as its name implies, is more geared for just evaluating the platform. It's not designed for production usage. So from there, if you want to kind of do that live network sniffing, but if you want to do it in more of a production capacity, we have what's called the standalone node. And so that's really kind of, you've got your sniffing interface and you've got the processes that are kind of tuned properly to allow you to run in a production mode 24/7. And you could potentially add other agents into it. You can add other nodes into that deployment. But really, if you're kind of going for a large enterprise deployment, really what we recommend there is our standard distributed deployment starts off with a dedicated manager node. So a manager node is not going to be sniffing any traffic. It's really just managing all of the other nodes. So you're going to log into the manager, and that's where your web interface is. That's what's going to manage your forward nodes. Your forward nodes are your sensors that are sniffing the network traffic. They're generating IDS alerts with Suricata. They're generating metadata either with Zeek or Suricata. They're doing full packet capture using Google Stenographer. And then they're taking the IDS alerts and the metadata logs, and they're forwarding all of that information to your manager, which then is able to store all of those logs in your search nodes. And so what you end up with is this distributed deployment with a manager node, one or more forward nodes, one or more search nodes. And that then becomes a really kind of scalable deployment model where you can then plug in additional forward nodes as your network needs grow. And as you start monitoring more network traffic, as you start consuming more endpoint logs, then you need to bulk up your backend so you can snap in additional search nodes as well.
Yeah. So Doug, I want to caution people to not overlook things like I did and create a forwarding node and then a manager node and not a search node, because you don't get a warning about that. And things break in ways that even your support and open source issues thing like that doesn't tell you that it breaks.
Paul,
and I feel like I'm missing some. I'm like, I gotta go back and do this again. And I'm like, oh, I forgot to give it any kind of search node.
Paul, there's these things called feature requests that Security Onion has built in. I mean, I'm just saying.
Yeah. So Doug, maybe like a warning, like, remember, so Paul says, don't forget to add a search node.
We have had a few folks Doug, run into that. So you're not the only one, Paul. So we did go back and add some verbiage to our documentation about that. But we can certainly look into, if there's a way that we can add some warnings into the installer itself to help guide folks in the right direction there.
Because you want
let's
manager.
Let's be clear, everybody. That was the nicest possible way anybody's ever called Paul a dumbass before in his entire life.
It's to say RTFM, which is totally. I mean, it's totally fair. I mean, I admitted I didn't read the documentation as thoroughly as I should have. But the option you want is manager plus search node plus a forwarding node. That was my deployment. Which I like that separation. I tend not to like the forwarding node on my manager and search node, right? Because usually that forwarding node, I get stuff in the data center closet or somewhere right far away. The other one can be a VM, that lives anywhere.
That's absolutely right.
I think Doug, what you need is a 5x8 12-step install guide in a large friendly font we can read without our glasses with a QR code for the web page to get help.
Yes.
Right. It's always
named Shirley or something. Yeah.
It's always a fun progression, even from the original version of Security Onion way back in 2008 of putting something out there and then, seeing others use the software and doing things which may or may not have been intended, and then kind of going back and trying to address that with documentation, trying to address that in the software itself, so software development is hard, and, we can't, my crystal ball is in the shop, so I can't accurately predict, every single way in which somebody is going to try to deploy the platform. But we do try to be responsive to that kind of stuff as much as possible. We had a discussion internally today about, somebody was on our GitHub discussion forum, and they were talking about a particular problem, something that we hadn't really envisioned, that particular corner case, but then it's like, okay, well, let's figure out how we can deal with this so that other folks don't have to experience that pain and frustration in the future. So that's always going to come as like the immediate Band-Aid is, okay, well, let's go and update the documentation. The longer term Band-Aid is, let's see if we can go into the code itself and prevent that corner case from occurring in the first place, or at least put some guardrails, some warning messages or something in the code itself, just to give that much of a better experience in the future.
Well, yeah, and I think guidance is appreciated, and I think it will lead to increased adoption, Doug, right? Because the other, once you correctly set up the forwarding node manager and search nodes, however you've deployed them, the next kind of set of collection points in addition to your forwarding node are all of your agents and or configurations that you want to put on all of your devices. Like, you can forward syslog from your firewall, maybe. You've got log beats, you've got Wazoo, you've got what's the other one that we covered?
The Elastic Agents.
Elastic Agents, and the one that we covered, Fleet. With OS Query. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah,
so
and that's
like
the other thing too.
I'm like, wait, what am I installing on all of my systems here, and what benefit does it have, and how does it tie together? You're going to show some of that in the demo, but yeah.
And that's the other thing too. It's like, as we've progressed from 2008 to 2014 to today, there's an ever increasing number of feature requests from the community and from our customer base of, hey, can you support X? Hey, can you integrate Y? Can we do X, Y, Z? And we try to be responsive to that as much as possible. But the logical conclusion of that is that, now you're increasing the complexity of the platform by an order of magnitude, when you start adding in all these variables, because you've got to account for that in the installer itself. You've got to have some questions that kind of prompt around, okay, do you want to do just network? Do you want to do endpoint as well? Which endpoint do you want to use? And then there's kind of the maintenance concern of, okay, well, those are logs that have to be taken care of, and you have to have retention policies and things like that. But at the same time, you want to make sure that you don't fill up your disk. And so, there's all these little variables that go into every single one of those decisions that we make. And so, we absolutely want to provide as many features and as much integration and make it as rich as possible in terms of feature set. But it's always going to be, a balancing act of making sure that that stuff is properly documented and that it flows together and is cohesive in terms of the user experience.
And Doug, you and team have done a fantastic job on that. I just have to say, I was super impressed with the number of technologies that you've put together in this cohesive manner. So like the fact that some people have problems with this, like that's just the nature of this, because you've put together an elk stack with salt stack that reads from Jinja templates, and you've got all the elastic beats and OS query and all these other things. You've got Docker, underneath the hood. You've got the firewall rules to configure, and you've written your own user interface for configuring all of the firewall rules that need to happen. The encryption happens without too much kind of work from the user. I didn't have to generate my own certificates or anything like that. So a lot of that just happened. So, I mean, bravo to you and team, because bringing all of those technologies together in this platform is truly amazing.
It's definitely a team effort. If I was still the one-man band that I was back in 2008, we certainly wouldn't have this massive platform that we have today. That's for sure. I've got an amazing team, and they're all doing some great work on, every single one of those things that you mentioned, from Salt Stack. I had never touched Salt Stack, 10 years ago, or just a few years ago, really. Containers, those were kind of an experiment that we started off with our previous platform. That experiment worked out really well. So we said, okay, well, that's the next gen platform is going to be all container based. And so that was certainly a learning curve, but it certainly has paid dividends in terms of making a more consistent, repeatable process, and really creating a much more secure by default environment where each of these processes is in their own containers. They're isolated from each other. It just creates a really great product. And so, it really has been a team effort of all of these individuals coming together with their individual amounts of knowledge and experience, and, us coming together as a team and saying, okay, well, let's take this, and this, let's put it all together, and let's wrap a user interface around it, and let's beat on it until it starts to really hum and it starts to really sing and it starts to work for our production purposes. And then we can actually release it out to the public. And, like I was saying before, that's kind of where the fun begins, because that's where the rubber meets the road of figuring out, okay, what are all the corner cases that we didn't predict ahead of time? But it's really been a lot of fun to work with the team and build this platform and release it last year and see, users really changing their security operations centers and the way that they, are able to deploy this out to their enterprises and really do some threat hunting that they couldn't ever do before. That's been amazing to see.
Yeah, for sure. I think it rivals some of the commercial options out there. I think it's really interesting how far along all these open source technologies, have come. And like, really, what else do you get with a commercial product, right? Is kind of where my brain is at. Or at least, since this software is free, why wouldn't I have that maybe in conjunction with my commercial offering?
Can I throw something in there, Paul?
Yeah.
I mean, let's be honest. Most of the commercial solutions out there are based on stuff that Security Onion has.
Right, Elk Stack.
How many MSSPs are in their carefully curated proprietary stack actually running the same open source pieces that Security Onion gives away? I mean, come on. We all know that there's significant, well-known names in the MSSP and in the network monitoring world that are also running Security Onion.
Yep. I can neither confirm nor deny.
It's awesome. One of my first kind of questions, and hopefully we can segue into the demo, Doug, was once you do get this up and running and you start doing some analysis, I think where my brain immediately went is, how do I correlate these events together? How do I observe something on the network, correlate that to something that happened on the host, get from that host that there was a process that was running that's likely, responsible for that network traffic I saw, associated with a particular user, and kind of distill that all together.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that we have been doing for years now as kind of a manual process, out of necessity of looking at this network traffic, trying to trace it back to what was the actual process running on which of the thousands of boxes in my enterprise, and what happened before that, what happened after that. So that correlation is really kind of key to a lot of the incident response work that we do. And so that's why we built a very customized correlation feature into Security Onion 2. And essentially the way that works is based on Community ID, which is an open standard, which essentially allows you to take a network tuple, source IP, source port, destination IP, destination port, and basically create a hash of that and use that hash value to look for that really anywhere in your massive mountain of data. And so tools like Suricata and Zeek, they can natively generate that community ID value. However, there's a lot of tools that don't yet support that. For example, Sysmon. We all know and love Sysmon in the Windows world because it gives us great telemetry from our Windows endpoints. And lots of folks have asked for community ID capability in Sysmon. That's been requested. If you go out to their GitHub repo, it's been requested. That's been accepted as a feature request, but it's never actually been implemented. And so, that's an example. Firewall logs are another great example. And so what we do is anytime those logs come into Security Onion, if it's got a network tuple, we automatically tell Elasticsearch to dynamically generate that community ID value so that we can then use our Correlate feature, which is in our web interface. So what we'll see in the demo in a minute is, starting with an IDS alert coming from Suricata and using our Correlate feature to look for that community ID value wherever it may exist. And so we can very easily correlate from a Suricata alert to a Zeek metadata log to a Sysmon log on a host, maybe also to, say, a pfSense firewall log or something like that. And you can instantly be able to kind of reconstruct the scene of the crime just using that community ID value and the Correlate feature that we've built into our interface. So shall we shift into the demo?
Let's do it.
All right. Going to share my screen and we'll go with desktop 2. All right, so you should see my web browser.
Indeed. Yes, we do.
And so this is Security Onion 2. This is our web interface. And so we've built a custom alerts interface that's very specifically designed for kind of the workflow that we use ourselves as incident responders. And so one of the things that we do is, of course, we want to see the alerts themselves, but then we want to be able to drill into the alerts. And so, for example, we have this alert here from the emerging threats rule set. It's in the policy category, and it's for the curl user agent. Now, I love this example because, this is one of those things that could be totally legitimate traffic. This could be totally expected in your environment, or you could be in an environment where you never see curl. And so the very first time that you see curl being used in your environment, that should absolutely set off an alert. So this is one of those things which could go either way depending on your organization, but it's definitely something that I want to investigate. So I see here that I have one instance of that particular alert. And this is something that, when we designed this alerts interface, we wanted it to scale from small VMs like this one all the way up to enterprise. And so, this idea of kind of aggregating alerts and just showing the total count really helps with the scalability of it. So let's drill into the alert. And of course, we can kind of open the alert. We can see the fields inside of the alert. And we can see things like the network data decoded field. And that's where we see the HTTP GET request for totally legitimate, nothing to see here, .dat. Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds like fun. So I definitely want to take a look at that. And Paul, as you were mentioning earlier, we spent a lot of time working on our PCAP interface specifically and how we pivot to that. And so, if I want to go from this IDS alert, and I think about, that example that I mentioned earlier of a commercial IDS appliance that I used many, many years ago, and it took like 20 clicks to get from an IDS alert to something even remotely resembling PCAP. Here, we just click on this, we go to actions, and we click PCAP. So behind the scenes, it's going out to Google Stenographer and it's requesting that particular TCP stream. It's bringing those packets back and rendering it as an ASCII transcript. So now I can see that entire TCP stream from start to finish. So I see the HTTP GET request, I see the user agent string of curl, and that's exactly what generated that IDS alert. So we're kind of verifying that it is a true positive. Then we can look into the web server's response of 200 OK. We see the server string here, and that looks kind of interesting. So I definitely want to kind of continue this investigation here. But that's when I get to the payload, what the server actually sends back to the web client. And this appears to be binary. And so, at this point in time, what I really want to do is I want to kind of break into analysis mode, right? I want to take this binary and I want to try to figure out what's going on. So another thing that we did just a few months ago in terms of workflow is we said, okay, well, we spend a lot of time like sending packets or sending data to Cyberchef to do analysis. So let's make that as streamlined as possible. So now that's one click. I can send that entire TCP stream over to Cyberchef as hex dump, and we automatically apply the from hex dump recipe.
Ooh,
and so in the output pane,
sorry, we needed an there. That was awesome.
So in the output pane, I'm able to see that TCP stream kind of as an ASCII transcript as we saw in the previous window, but now I have all the power of Cyberchef at my fingertips. So here's what I can do. So I can go up here and I can strip HTTP headers, and that removes those HTTP client headers. And if we notice, we now have a magic wand in the output pane, which says if we apply strip HTTP headers again, that will remove the web server headers. So we'll click the magic wand. Now we're down to just that binary itself. So now let's go and do from binary. So that converts the binary. Now we're seeing hex. So now let's change and let's apply an additional operation from hex. So now that we've done that, we see this blob down here, which kind of looks like it's base 64. We do have a magic wand, and if we hover over that, it confirms that if we apply the from base 64 operation, then it kind of detects that there's an image there, and it can render the image itself. So shall we click the magic wand?
Yes, click it, do it.
Yeah, obviously. Let's click it.
Do it.
All right, here we go. So just want to say, longtime Security Weekly fan, I'm never going to give you guys up. I love what you guys are doing.
Oh, nice.
Well played.
So,
You rickrolled this.
The obligatory, you suck. Keep going.
But seriously, folks, you guys are giving an amazing value to the community. And, like you were saying at the top of the show, 717 shows, like that's a lot. So kudos to you all. Keep up the great work.
Hey,
we love what you're doing. So that's our kind of first example of pivoting from an IDS alert to full packet capture, doing some analysis on that. But let's go a step further, because
Doug, I'm sorry, you also have I don't know if you're going to show this, the interface where I can see the handshakes and all the traffic kind of color-coded?
Yes. So I'll show you that real quick. If we go back to PCAP, we can change this view.
Yes.
So you can see it like that as well.
That's the view that I love, because you can see all of the TCP.
You get the
handshakes.
TCP flags, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's real. I'm like, oh man, that's awesome.
So now let's kind of take this the next step, because really what started this conversation was, how do you correlate from network events to host-based events and vice versa? So what we can do is we can go to our actions, but instead of choosing the PCAP option, we can choose this correlate option that we talked about. And so that's going to take us from alerts over to our hunt interface. And it's going to use that community ID value that we talked about, which is this value up here. And that's essentially a hash of that network tuple of source IP, source port, destination IP, destination port. Okay. And what we see in the results here is that we have not only the Suricata alert that we were just looking at, but we also have some Zeek logs. So we have a Zeek HTTP log that represents that HTTP transaction, the HTTP GET, and the response from the web server. We also have the Zeek con log that represents the connection itself on port 80. So we were able to correlate from a Suricata alert to Zeek metadata, but we're also able to correlate to this network connection from Sysmon. And so here, if I include that, so that filters my display down to just that one sysmon log, here I can immediately see that the process executable was curl.exe. And so, instantly I'm able to correlate from network traffic to the actual process running on this particular host with this particular username. And from there, I can even take it a step further and let's say, well, show me everything for that particular binary. So I can run a hunt for that curl.exe. And now, in addition to that network connection sysmon log, I've got another sysmon log, and that's for the process creation itself. And that's one of those things that we really love about sysmon, right? The great telemetry that it gives you from those Windows endpoints. And now, as of recently, they just announced sysmon for Linux as well. So, being able to see those network connections from the sysmon perspective, the process creation as well. So I could drill into this log.
More and more, I feel like my Linux boxes are becoming Windows machines. It's got sysmon, it's got Edge, it's got Teams. Like anyway.
GitHub is owned by Microsoft now.
Right? It's so weird.
Dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria.
And on the Converse WSL.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's got kind of a weird yin yang kind of thing. Huh?
That's right. So now we can do things like this, where I can say, hey, group by process.command line. And oh, by the way, let's also group by process.parent.command line. And so now you're able to see, really an even more complete picture of, this was an actual cmd.exe, and we were running curl against this IP address, requesting totally legitimate, nothing to see here, .dat. And so really that's painting that complete picture from start to finish of the process running on the box, generating the network traffic, and everything in between. And so now let's take that an even step further, and let's see if we can go back the other direction, right? Because now what we could do is we could say, well, let's do a hunt for all of my sysmon logs. And so if I look at this event listing down here, I could say, well, I've already seen these curl.exe logs. So let me just exclude those just to clean up the listing a little bit. And, maybe I look at this listing and I see some network connections from Microsoft Edge, and it's going to destination port 8080. So maybe I might want to look at those. So for example, I might take a look at this one, and maybe I drill into it. And I see the fields that sysmon is giving me, but it's honestly not a ton of information that sysmon gives me for this particular network connection log. And so maybe I want to correlate back the other direction, right? So maybe I go down to correlate, and here I get my sysmon network connection log that I just looked at, and I'm correlating that to my Zeek HTTP log and connection log. So let's just focus on the HTTP log. And so I see that for this port 8080 connection, there was a GET request and a POST request. Well, I'm always interested in POST requests. So how about I pivot to full packet capture? And there's Paul's favorite interface. And so I can see the POST request, and I can see some things happening here. But let's flip to the ASCII transcript, which makes it a little bit easier to see that in this POST request, what we're actually kind of uploading to this web server is a file called definitely not exfil.zip. Well, that's ominous sounding. So again, we want to kind of carve that file out and figure out what was in it. So let's do that. Click over to Cyberchef. And so now it's going to bring those packets over in hex dump format. It's going to apply that from hex dump recipe and give us this nice output here. So we do the same thing that we did before. We can strip the HTTP headers, and we can run that one more time to strip off the top there. And so if you'll notice, our output is now down to PK, which is the standard file header for a zip file. And the magic wand appears, which confirms our suspicions that, yeah, that does indeed look like a zip file. And so what we could do is we could say, well, let's run unzip. And so it unzips the zip file. And inside of that is another file called definitely not exfil.png. Well, that's interesting. So of course I could download it and I could open it up in my file system, but let's just do all of this from Cyberchef. So let's move that to the input. Let's go to that tab. Let's clear our recipes. And now let's see if we can render that. And there you go. So there's our exfil. Just a shameless old plug for downloading Security Onion. Just like in A Christmas Story when, be sure to drink your Ovaltine, a crummy commercial.
Yeah,
right?
all that just so we can drink our Ovaltine.
So that's our demo. That's, using that import node that we talked about. So I'm running Security Onion 2 in a virtual machine. You can do this with only 4 gigabytes of RAM. So if you've never played around with Security Onion 2, this is a great way to get started. Just install it in a virtual machine, choose that import mode. You can import PCAP files. You can import EVTX files. And that's exactly what I did for this demo. And it's a great way to get your feet wet with the distro.
Love it. That's awesome stuff. Doug, we interviewed someone from OS Query. What was his name? Now I can't remember. Zack. Yes, Zack. Zack added a feature that will compare the software that's installed in your machine and the version number to any known CVEs. How's that coming along to work into the Security Onion?
I can tell you that one of my folks, Josh Brower, was talking just today about upgrading the version of Fleet. Mm-hmm. So I can't make any promises, but you might start looking at what's coming up soon.
Yeah, sure. And obviously we established there are a lot of moving parts, for lack of a better term, in Security Onion. And having done software as well, we all know about regression testing and all that stuff. That stuff takes time, so I totally get it.
Absolutely.
No, that's awesome. I just want to tick the box for some vulnerability management too, because I've invested in setting this stuff up, and you should do this in your own environment as well, is set up the Security Onion, and then once you get the agents start deploying, you want to use them for as much as possible, because there's an agent now running on your systems. You spent time deploying those agents out to your systems, bringing that all back to a central console. Doug, you showed all of the wonderful correlation features and awesome stuff. You want to use it for as much as possible.
Absolutely. And, I think about something that you said in your previous segment on Security Onion, and that's, once you start getting this visibility out there, once you start looking at that telemetry, you just, you tend to go down one amazing rabbit hole after another of, wow, I have this visibility now. And that brings up all these questions about, is this legitimate? Is this suspicious? And then that kind of sparks other questions about, well, how could we, if this was a false positive, well, let's assume hypothetically that it was a true positive. How could we detect that in the future? How could we write some sort of how could we develop a playbook to deal with that in the future? And that's really one of the things that we've tried to do as a platform is again, bring all of that kind of full circle of not just the network detection, not just the host detection, but what do you actually do with that? How do you store it? How do you investigate it? How do you do that entire incident response lifecycle and prepare for the next incident as well?
It's good stuff. Questions from the rest of the crew?
Yeah. So I was wondering how many, are you using any external tools to help with the analysis? And are people worried about what data you're leaving on those tools related to their activities? Are
you asking specifically about the endpoint agents?
Or, if you're calling something that's in the cloud to better analyze the data, or are you all self-contained, nothing external within the system?
So our platform is pretty much self-contained. And one of the reasons why is because we have a lot of users of our software in the military on classified networks. They're totally air-gapped. They have no internet access whatsoever. So all of our stuff has to work, totally self-contained.
And the communications, and I believe, Lee, you were the one that asked this question as well. the last time we talked about Security Onion, the communications between forwarding nodes, managers, and search nodes, all of that is encrypted by default. Like, I mean, you could probably turn it off, but you don't want to do that.
Yeah. So, one of our kind of guiding principles as a platform is we've got to do everything right, and part of doing everything right is, making sure that anything that we send across the network from one Security Onion node to another, it's got to be encrypted. We know that if we were to mess up and send stuff across the network in clear text, that means we're having a bad day. That means our customers are having a bad day. And we want to make sure that we're doing the right thing. So it was very important for us, especially, in moving from the original Security Onion platform to Security Onion 2, we kind of changed the way that we accomplished that. Originally, Security Onion leveraged SSH tunnels to kind of wrap a lot of those protocols that were by default clear text. But we really kind of redid everything in Security Onion 2, taking advantage of kind of native encryption where we could. And so there are no more SSH tunnels per se from one node to another. But we're, for example, leveraging FileBeat encryption connecting to the manager node as it's sending logs across the network. So all of that stuff is kind of built into those elastic components. We're leveraging the capability that's already there. But what we're doing is when you set up those nodes, we're automatically generating a CA. We're automatically generating your certificates for you. We're automatically deploying those certificates out to every single one of those pieces of software that has to know about those certificates. And all that stuff is hopefully as seamless as possible so that encryption is on by default. You don't have to think about it and you don't have to work for it.
What about certificate updates? Or are you just making them real long-lived?
So I believe that when that certificate expires, SaltStack does everything necessary to kind of regenerate it and redeploy those certificates. And that's one of the kind of the beauties of having this platform being container-based, but having those containers being orchestrated by SaltStack is that there's so much logic built into all of those Salt scripts that just make sure that things are working and working properly. So that if, for example, if you were to delete a file here, in many cases, Salt will put it back into place. And so it's kind of self-healing from that perspective. So it's nice to have developed this whole framework of states, and SaltStack verifies that each and every one of those states is always valid every single time that it goes on a run, which is by default every 15 minutes.
That's nice, because if the temptation for somebody to go tweak something they shouldn't is still around in our world, and I love it that it's going to put it back, and really reduces the overhead of trying to do this too. That's what is it, the pets versus cattle analogy? I've built a lot of pets.
Yep.
We all have, if you're old enough. Yeah.
Yes, most of what we built is pets.
So, Doug, so we've got the hardware appliances now, and you've got the response ready. Did you call it appliances?
Yes, absolutely. That's the kind of emergency incident response, more portable form factor. That's called response ready. Yep.
And then you've got containerization on a lot of the pieces of this, so that they're ready to be put not just into any environment, but any cloud environment as well. Am I correct?
That's absolutely right. So we actually have a pre-built Amazon AWS image. So you can get our official AMI that's already out there in the Amazon marketplace. We've got the same thing for Azure. So you can go to the Azure marketplace. You can get our official image for that as well. So we realize that, cloud is the future. And for many organizations, it's where they're at today. So we want to make sure that we are in those environments and we're providing the same kind of capability and the same kind of visibility there as well. So we're absolutely heavily investing in the cloud as well.
Okay, so two more questions about that. GCP as well, or can I use a containerized system in GCP even if there's not a native one built for that? And then how about multi-cloud? If I'm in multiple clouds, do I need to deploy one in each of those clouds? And can I aggregate the results in I think it's the search appliance?
Yeah. So the first question was about GCP, and GCP is kind of an interesting beast. We have applied to be an official Google partner so that we can get into their marketplace. Apparently, there are some kind of hangups with that whole process. But in any case, we do have capability for deploying in GCP. So that is a possibility. And in terms of kind of multi-cloud deployments, we do that ourselves. So our company deployment is actually a multi-cloud deployment. So we absolutely support that, and it works like a champ.
So if I've got like on-prem, private cloud, and multi-public cloud, I would deploy what? What's it called in each sort of area?
Forwarding node.
Forwarding node. Thank you. And then I would deploy a search node somewhere convenient, and have all the results head to that. Am I correct?
Manager node.
Yeah. So you'd probably want to build a manager node first in some kind of a cloud environment, and then add some search nodes to that manager node in that cloud environment. And then start deploying your forward nodes out to all of your environments, whether that's your cloud enclaves or your on-prem environments or whatever the case may be. And you're absolutely right. Those forward nodes forward all their logs to the manager. They get distributed to the backend search nodes. And
see, Josh, in the documentation, there's diagrams of how everything.
Hey! I didn't claim to have done it since it was Security
Paul, did you just say RTFM?
Okay? It's been a little while for me.
You did. He did. Slip that in there real quick.
That's what she said. Anyway,
attaboy.
So look, in all seriousness, so I can do a multi-cloud environment and aggregate all my results into one location, so that I can then search the one location and see all the results aggregated. I can compare my Amazon traffic, my AWS traffic, to my Azure traffic, to my on-prem traffic, to my private cloud traffic, right?
Absolutely. You can have that single pane of glass that all the vendors talk about, and you can see all of your logs from every corner of your network.
Now, Doug, you can't have multiple manager nodes. But what if can you have is there a concept of something that sits in between a forwarding node and a manager node to do the collection, or not yet, or you haven't had the requirement or need for that?
So we have some kind of internal discussions about that. And so what you might expect to see in the future is some options around that. So one of them is we've kind of talked about this idea of a manager of managers, where you might have kind of a few different deployments, but then you have kind of an overarching manager of managers that manages all of those individual deployments. We actually have one customer today that's kind of beta testing that idea now. Another thing that we are talking about is for the future, kind of integrating with Kafka to build kind of an even more powerful log pipeline, where you can do a lot of those really kind of custom things of, well, let's aggregate logs here, and let's do some additional decoration, and let's do some, additional augmentation of those records, and let's pass them over to this for some additional intel, and then ultimately distribute those out to the back-end search nodes. So we're doing a lot of stuff there. The other option that you have today is, for our kind of back-end search nodes, traditionally, the way that we have deployed those is each of those search nodes is actually its own independent Elasticsearch cluster. So it's just a single node cluster that's independent of all the others. And so when you have a distributed deployment, traditionally, our manager node uses what's called cross-cluster search to search across each of those independent Elasticsearch instances. What we also support now is, if you want to do more traditional Elastic clustering, where each of your search nodes actually joins together into one giant Elastic cluster, you can do it that way as well. Now, that requires a little bit more know-how. It requires a little bit more care and feeding, but that's kind of another way that we're kind of changing the options that we present to folks based on demand that's out there, right? There's a lot of folks that have said, hey, we want a real elastic cluster so we can do like replicas, so we can do hot warm and things like that. So, we're definitely providing lots of options for architecture and how we meet organizations where they are and plug into their organizational architecture and needs.
Doug, you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
I don't know. I'm scared. Let's go.
I don't think you did this the last time you were on.
And I was going to say, you've been listening long enough. You probably already know what they are.
That's it. They changed slightly over the years. But Doug, 3 words to describe yourself.
Blue team forever.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Well, if I'm a serial killer, spoon.
If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
The Onion Farmer's Almanac.
Your favorite hacker movie?
You know what? There's so many to choose from, but I have to go with War Games.
War Games, nice. Yes. Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive, dead, fictional, or otherwise.
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 Alive,
Is there an echo in here?
fictional or otherwise.
All right. I'd have to go with Jerry Seinfeld and Julia Louis-Dreyfus.
Nice.
Ooh.
Nice.
Ooh.
Outstanding. Doug, thank you so much for appearing on Paul Security Weekly.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.
And you can find more at, well, just search for Security Onion. You'll find it. It's all there. The free software, the documentation.
Just Google me.
Just Google it. Coming up next, more on scripting with Python for default credentials. Stay tuned.